Namaste, dear learners. I welcome you all to our series of video lessons. Today we will discuss uh, an essay called The Man in Black, which is written by one of the best known essayists of the 18th century, Oliver Goldsmith. The present essay is prescribed for BA 5th semester Basic English, Rani Chennamma University, Belagavi. Subtitle of today's video session is The Man in Black Helps the Poor. The learning objectives of this lesson are the students, after completing this session, the students will be able to appreciate the essay The Man in Black. The session outcomes of this essay are: appreciate the kindness of the man in black. After going through the session, the students will be able to appreciate how kind was the protagonist of the essay, The Man in Black. Before going to start the essay, we will have a quick recap of what we have studied in our previous video session. In our previous video session, we learned about the socio-political conditions of England of 18th century. We also learnt about how poor people lived in their parish house, and after that we learned how the government of England has a number of provisions for uplifting the poor people from their poverty. And after that we learned that the protagonist calls the beggars of England as impostors. And after that we learned how the protagonist seems to be unhappy with the behavior of the beggars of England, and he wants them to be kept in prison rather than showing sympathy to them. Then we learned the inconsistencies of human behavior, and after that we learned how these beggars and poor people of England seems to be humorists. The Man in Black and Altangi are having a discussion on beggars and poverty. They discuss about the condition of the beggars as well poverty in England, and at the same time they discuss about the provisions which are given by the government of London to uplift the poor people from their poverty, and to bring the beggars to the forefront of the society. At that time, when Althangi and the Man in Black are discussing about the beggars, an old man appeals for help in the form of a beggar. And that old man gives an account of his dying wife, and he also says to the protagonist that he had left behind 5 children at home who are hungry, and at the same time his wife is dying of ill health. And after listening to the story of the old man, the man in black seems to be moved by the story of the old man. At that time, the man in black says, I could easily perceive that his heart burned to relieve the 5 starving children, but he seemed ashamed to discover his weakness to me. After listening to the words of the poor beggar, the heart of the man in black seems to be melting, and he was ready to help that poor man. He was willing to help that old poor beggar person, and he wants to feed those five starving children, and he wants to help the poor man to get medication to his wife. But the man in black seemed ashamed to show off his kind heartedness in front of a Chinese traveler. But the man in black doesn't want to show his weakness of sympathy to the foreigner. That is the reason why he holds back himself, and he doesn't come forward to help the poor man. But inside, but his mind was trying to search the ways to help that poor person. Seeing it, Altangi pretends to look another way. The Chinese traveler understands the condition of the man in black and turns the other way, so that the man in black helps that poor person. The man in black stealthily slips in a piece of silver into the beggar's hands. When the man in black learns that the Chinese traveler is looking away, he takes out a piece of silver and puts it into the hands of the poor beggar. And at the same time, the man in black warns the old man against troubling people like him. And the man in black also suggests the old man not to trouble people like him. At the same time, there comes a sailor who was having a wooden leg, and he was carrying a bundle of chips. And the man seems to be miserable and in great pain, and this scene again moves the heart of the man in black. At that time, there seems to be a pretense to expose the impostor. The man in black questions the sailor with the wooden leg, and the man in black gets a reply with anger by the sailor. The sailor says that he had been an officer on board a private ship of war, and that he had lost his leg aboard in defense of those who did nothing at home. The sailor tells his own story to the man in black, that once he was an officer in a private ship which went to the war, and the sailor tells the man in black that he lost his leg in defense of the people of England who are sitting in home doing nothing. And by telling this story, the sailor wants to create a kind of sympathy towards himself. Then, after listening to this story, the sympathetic character of the man in black comes out, and he buys the bundle of chips for 1 shilling. The man in black gives much money and buys the chips from the sailor, so that he would get his what the chips sold. But The man in black in front of Altangi pretends to be that he had purchased cheaply the chips. He pretends as if he has bought the chips because they are cheap. But in reality, this man has given more money than the price of the chips, so that he indirectly helped the sailor who has lost his leg in the war. Now they see a poor woman in rags. After these two incidents, they come across to a poor woman in rags. That woman was having a child in her arms and another on her back. The woman was carrying two children, and she was attempting to sing ballads. She was trying to sing ballads, and through those ballads, she was expecting a kind of sympathy from the people, but with such a mournful voice. Even though she was singing a ballad, her voice seems to be mournful, seems to be sad, seems to be full of tragedies. Without minding the presence of Altangi, the man in black searches in his pocket for a piece of money. After this, now the man in black seems to be shedding off his mask, and his hand unconsciously goes into his pocket and searches for a piece of money to give to that poor woman. There is none, so he puts the bundle of chips into her hand and walks away. When he searches for money in his pocket, he finds none, and then he realizes that there is no money in his pocket, and he simply takes the chips and keeps those chips into the hand of the poor old woman and walks away silently. To conclude, the man in black is a very kind hearted man, but he tries to appear himself to be a man hater. However, he tries to be harsh, but when he encounters with the beggars, he unknowingly reveals his real character. This inconsistency in his character is interesting to learn. Even the people seems to be harder and harsh. In reality, they are very sympathetic towards the poor and the beggars. Thank you very much. In our next video session, we will discuss the rest of the essay.